Okay, well, today I'm joined by Marcelo Fernandes, who's the Global Head of Adoption and ABM Vice President at SAP. Marcelo, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, listen, we've been having a chat. This has been a long time in the making, this episode, so I'm delighted you could make it today. I'm really looking forward to talking ABM with you and learning a bit more about ABM at SAP. So let's just start off with a question there about SAP. You've been now, I think, with the company for about 9 years now. And obviously, there's been a huge evolution over that period with regards to SAP and also with regards to ABM. So could you paint us a little bit of a picture of what's happening there at your organization, in particular with regards to account-based marketing?
Yeah, sure. In general, of course, that the evolution in marketing has been, I think, great from starting back then years ago, with more focus specifically on demand generation, and now and very in a very siloed way. And now we have much more advanced campaigns built, focused on the specific product lines and campaigns that are taking care of the holistic approach of how you build a brand around this specific solution area. That's what we call. Particularly related to ABM, ABM has been a function that comes and goes time to time, but in the last 2 years, almost 2.5 years already, there was a decision to really invest in ABM, and that's where I was fortunate to get this new position. And then, coming from a regional perspective, I've always been in charge of taking care of portfolios in Latin America. And then 2.5 years ago, I took this new position to develop the ABM program globally and kind of export best practices that were happening across the regions, but not necessarily called as a real ABM. There has always been some sort of effort around ABM, particularly in North America, where there's more maturity, the market is bigger. There are resources focused on ABM there, and in the other regions there were like independent efforts going on here and there. So the intent of this function was exactly to gather these best practices and these approaches that were happening across different regions and transform them into a specific playbook, as we call it. So based on these approaches and conversations with the regions and how they were developing things, the idea was to really develop and create this ABM playbook where we gather, and we structure and gather these practices, and then we make it available to everyone in the company so that we can, run ABM programs, kind of trying to come up with a standardization approach to ABM, based on this program. And then from last year to this year, we decided to kind of do a new approach. And even though it's still ABM, we decided to call it strategic account marketing, which we just did like an adaptation to what used to be the typical function of ABM, the typical pillars of ABM, to how the company is developing its go-to-market now and how the cloud is getting importance to SAP. So we did this small adaptation. We are calling people now Summers and not ABMers anymore. But in essence, there is a reason behind that. I'm sure that you're going to get, to other questions where I will be able to explore that. But the main idea was to kind of run a little bit from the typical ABM concept and really concentrate on the new go-to-market of the organization.
Fantastic, Marcel. Well, we will dig a little bit more into that actually. So I'm just making a couple of notes here. So you touched on there an interesting point around a playbook, and I think you've also referred to it as a framework, I think. So could you just share a little bit more information about that in terms of, you've obviously rolled this out now globally across different geographies, North America, Latin America, APAC, etc. What does it mean? What does it look like in how, if you could make the intangible tangible? What does that mean in practice for people listening who are thinking, oh, that's a really great idea to have an ABM framework? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I really wrote down like a playbook. In this playbook, there are things like, what is the objective of ABM? What is it based on? The pillars that we're basing ABM on. What do we want to achieve? What are the KPIs? How are we going to measure? What is the planning process for an ABM, to work with a certain account? How do alignment with sales and stakeholders. What are the planning steps that you need to go through from a account selection to the moment that you really discuss with the sales team around that account how you're going to prepare a plan. What plan elements, what we're calling core plan elements, there should be in an ABM program. So uh, we took all these things together, and then we designed this playbook with all of this kind of instructions. And for example, 2 years ago or 1.5 year ago, end of 2022 already, I had the launch of the ABM program for the teams for 2023, and then late 2023 in December we had the launch of the program for the strategic account marketing program for what's going to be in 2024. And exactly the idea is that we go through this steps of what ABM is formed of and how you actually implement ABM across the regions. And then we are trying to come up to a place where there are these core elements that everybody, because what happens sometimes with ABM is um, you have tactics that are applied and developed in the regions, and they are very great tactics, but sometimes it's very difficult to report them back from a volume perspective, from a global perspective. So what we're trying to achieve is that we come up with some core elements where people can actually use that core element to implement their programs in the region. But when we report back, and when we aggregate information from different regions, we can say, oh, we have done this X amount of things, to this X amount of accounts, across the region, and that was the result. And we did initiative A multiple times, we did initiative B multiple times, and we have this specific program elements that will, enable us to tell the story later on. So that's how we developed the approach of the framework, and what became a playbook.
Fascinating. So it's almost listening to you. It's almost a mix, as you said, between a manual and then also a recipe book, because the manual explains to people how to do ABM, the SAP way, and then obviously the recipes is, well, look, these are some of the core elements that we think really work pretty well. Try these. So these are almost like recipes for success. I mean, I think that's a really fascinating. I was just writing down here a note of everything you said that's included in it. I think we could probably do several episodes of Let's Talk ABM just to dig into each one of these different components. So let's talk about one component which of that manual, which is account selection. I think when we were chatting prior to this recording, just to get to know each other a little bit and to learn a bit more about the program, I think you mentioned at the time there's about just a little bit under 140 key accounts that are included in your one-to-one program. So I suppose for the audience out there, that sounds like a lot of accounts for a one-to-one motion. And I suppose the second question would be, how do you go about customizing, personalizing when you've got such a large number of accounts to go after and to talk to and to address their challenges?
Mm-hmm. Well, initially the program was born because we have at SAP a segment of customer that's called the Strategic Customer Program, and initially the program was born to support that accounts. And typically we have varies year by year, but typically we have around 150 to 170 accounts included in that program. Now, not all of them are really needing an ABM support. Some of them, depending on the stage, depending on the maturity, depending on the kind of deals that they are working on, depends on many factors, and depending also on the priorities of the local market units, there may not be a priority for all of them. So we decided also to say, okay, this program is going to be designed for these accounts, for this group of accounts, but also for local, that we call large enterprise accounts, which are relevant to the the market unit because they have some sort of business. This is a very important account for their business, and not necessarily it's a member of this global SCP that we call Strategic Customer Program (SCP) group. And then based on that, we said, okay, so let's prioritize first these accounts and then the large enterprises, and then let the regions select within this group of accounts what are going to be the relevant ones for them. What happened is that this year we have a new segmentation at SAP. There are new different segments, and again we decided to say, okay, the program is going to be focused on these new 4 segments, and within these new 4 segments, there is priority number 1, priority number 2, and priority number 3. And then in the same way, these guys in the field, they would select these accounts out of a certain group of accounts that's already a part of this new segments. As a result of that, we came up with a list of 138 accounts, and we are still missing APJ in this, in this definition, because there are some resourcing issues that are being worked on, and eventually there will be some more accounts joining the program. But at the moment, we have 138 accounts. It sounds like really a lot of accounts depending on the size of the company. But when you see, from an SAP perspective, with 400,000 customers across the world, I mean, 138 are not, is not a big number, even though these 138 represent more than 2 billion in active pipeline for us. So this is, a group of accounts where we're going to focus on. Now, how are we going to prioritize and to personalize this 138 accounts in the field? When we split this number of accounts by, all the market units, all the regions, the market units, and the number of people, the ABMers or the summers that are engaged with that, it ends up to being like 8 to 10 accounts per ABMer, and sometimes even a little bit less of that. And the idea is that we are going to develop programs for these accounts that are, in some cases very personalized. There are the bigger ones, where we're going to be able to really develop, 2-3 motions, take advantage of other things that are happening in the company, and build this journey for this customer that's not only formed by things that were developed specifically to that customer, but also leveraging things that are happening across the company, that you can have like a kind of white glove experience within that other thing that's happening, a bigger event, an executive visit in the region, something like this. And not necessarily that the ABM is creating that specific activity, but it's leveraging something that's going on. So these accounts, some of them will have multiple touches, multiple engagement opportunities, and some of them will have less. This time will tell across the year, depending on the focus that even the sales teams are giving, the support, the connection with with this sales stakeholders also. And some of them will have more complete, let's say, ABM programs, and some of them will have less complete ABM programs, depending on this dynamics of engagement and what happens across the year. So let's see, by the end of the year, we will know, of that. But as an example, last year we had 98 accounts selected to the program, and we were able to develop activities for 80 of them, actually. And there were a few of them that we didn't have the resources, because there are sometimes this layoffs happens, or other situations are happening, or the account changes the focus, or the sales team says, well, I had the intent to do something in the beginning of the year, but now I don't have anymore, things like that. And it's very dynamic. But we saw good result on the 80 that were part of the program against the other ones that were selected but were not part of the program.
Well, I think anybody listening and hearing that 80 out of 98 accounts you had great engagement from, and pipeline opportunities and activity, I think most people would like to have that and take that home with them. A couple of questions actually based on what you just said there, Marcelo. I think it was interesting the fact when you talk about engagement, you said obviously you just don't know what's going to happen, right? And I think it reminds me of a conversation I had with one of your fellow contemporaries, one of your peers, Rhiannon Blackwell at PwC, and she said that when you start an ABM program, and she just one-to-one as well, only one-to-one, she was saying that you have a working hypothesis. And obviously you put that working hypothesis into market, and then you see what happens in the market. And then some accounts will respond better, some accounts will respond worse. The macro, micro elements that are happening out there in the world that you can and cannot control. So I think that's really interesting. I think the second thing was you talked about this kind of being, quite a fluid movement as well. And I think that's what I'm taking from that as well, is that you're listening to your sales leaders and your account directors and all the kind of infrastructure there at SAP, who are engaged with your accounts, and then you're getting live feedback from them, I'm guessing, right, on each account. And then that's telling you or informing you to do more, to do less, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when the program starts, there is commitment from the because what we are doing is that we are creating a kind of account team, which is not only the sales folks. It's formed by the marketeers as well, right? The ABMers, and the idea is that they discuss how the program is going to develop to this customer, and they start really preparing. I was just exchanging an email with the someone from the our European team, and they were. I was just asking. I mean, I saw some of your plans. Some are more complete, some are less complete. We are working on this. We are developing on that. We are talking to the sales team, to see the activities. So it's a very dynamic process, right? I mean, to come up with a plan for these accounts. So what I have been asking them to do, most of the time is, when you sit and start the discussions with the sales guys, try to focus on really a journey for this customer. Don't just discuss the first activity that you're going to have, but think about your objective, and how you're going to develop a series of activities, a series of engagements that will lead you to achieve this objective. Sometimes it's of course difficult. It's very hard for you to come at this time of the year and say, I'm going to do activity number one in May, and activity number two in June, and number four in August, and so on. It's very hard to really say that at this point. But I think we developed a planning template, and the planning template kind of forces the people to think about how the objectives of the account are, understand the account, and then propose a plan that's going to fulfill that need. So that's how we are trying to make people think about ABM, and then have a plan based on something that they really understand. It's just not just a theoretical plan. But things change across along the way, and sometimes there is some situation with the account and they were willing to cooperate, and then all of a sudden, because something happened, they are not willing to cooperate anymore. So eventually you have to abandon this account or deprioritize this account. Things like that can happen.
Yeah, you never know what's going to be just around the corner, right? I think one thing that Marcelo you said, which I loved, was the whole thing about treat each account and the program you're going to do as a journey. I think the more you can do that, the less the more you can think about the experience and the journey that you want the customer or the prospect to go through, the more effective your program will be. Just talking about that, actually, my understanding was that your original program, or the way that SAP was approaching ABM, at least originally, was more around deal acceleration and more about trying to get customers to go quicker through the deals and to kind of to come on board with your new solutions. My understanding now is that focus from deal acceleration has moved a bit more towards customer lifecycle marketing, much more focused on the customer and the kind of advocacy, adoption. Is that the case?
Yes, it's totally the case. Yeah, I think because of the way we were kind of doing this, independently in the regions before, there was kind of an idea of doing ABM as a sort of deal support. So I have like an AE, and the AE needs some sort of help. I go there, produce one video, and I deliver this one video. And that particular video that I produced was to support, something that was going on specifically at that point in time, during the account relationship. And one of the things that we started to really change is exactly to think about the account from a life cycle perspective. So that's why I also work with adoption in this conversation, because previously we didn't have adoption, because also adoption was not something so important few years back, but now it's really important for our customers, because we're talking about the cloud, and the cloud business means usage of the solutions, right? So we started to think about, okay, when you develop a strategy for an account, you need to develop this strategy to accelerate the existing pipeline, the existing deals that are there. So supporting with this relationship improvement and making sure that they have more information, that they have all the structure and knowledge of the solutions that we are offering in that particular time, but also make sure that in some situations where they already have a lot of solutions, there may be a focus on the adoption of the solution. So it means that you might have to execute activities that are focused on, leveraging this adoption and consumption of the solutions. So ideally, a plan for an account would have these two elements together. That would be the perfect world, right? But in practice is very difficult because the focus on the accounts varies a lot. So some accounts have more focus eventually on the adoption side, and some of them will have more focus on the the acceleration, the deal acceleration side, and that's up to the account team that I mentioned before, to decide what's going to be the the real focus of that plan.
Well, it's a really interesting point there, because with your job title, where you have head of adoption in there as well, and also you've mentioned how SAP, just like many other technology companies, have moved much more to a cloud revenue model. That's really, how do you see that working in effect in terms of how do you see ABM being somewhat different than, rather than going for the acquisition or the purchase or this is where you've got to, as you said, you've got to get people to use your solution, because if they don't use your solution, you're not going to bill. I'm guessing it's the business model, right? So it's not, you can't just say, hey, we just signed another 3-year contract and we've had the money transferred to our bank account. Hooray! You're saying no. Actually, winning the client is only just the start of the journey.
Right, correct. I mean, when you in this cloud business, typically when the conversation with the customer starts, now there needs to be like a plan of how they're going to use what they bought, right? Because if I am a user of some cloud solution, for this video solution that you use here, for example, and you buy, let's say, 20 licenses, and then after 1 year you realize that you're only using 10 licenses, you'll say, okay, I'm renewing this business, but with 10 licenses only, because I'm not using 20. So the company in this case would be, trying to reach out to you and, to their platform customers, to make sure that they are teaching and they are making, enabling this customers to know how to use better, to have more opportunities to use that platform, so that the actual 20 licenses that you bought are the 20 licenses that you consume. And if the work is done well, you even feel that you need to buy more, because there are other features, other potential solutions. There is a video enhancement too. There is a whatever technology it's being sold. So you may want to renew this 20 licenses plus something else. So that's the the objective when we talk about adoption. And actually, the fact that I have adoption in my title is because I work within the field marketing organization. So adoption itself is something that's not only for ABM. An ABM account may have an adoption plan associated with it, thinking about the customer life cycle of that particular account. But adoption, it's a one to many play, where you really have to touch thousands and thousands of customers that the company has. So that's another motion that I work with, not necessarily connected with ABM, but of course that adoption is included in ABM. But but adoption itself is a complete different monster. It's much more complex than just including it in ABM.
Yeah, understood. So you mentioned there about your team. My understanding is that you've got quite a significant team dotted around the globe, some of which work for you full-time, some of which work for you part-time. I think that's correct. I think last time I think you mentioned it was about 40 approximately people. That's and also with the complexity of actually not everyone working 100% of their time for ABM. So I'm guessing they're in all geographies, as you mentioned, APAC and North America, Latin America, etc. So how do you make that work for you, particularly when they're not all 100% dedicated to the efforts of ABM? How do you make that work for you?
Yeah, well, that is a complicated setup. The only region that we actually have a dedicated team is North America. They have a manager and they have a team, and they also have the larger number of accounts that they need to focus on. So that was a decision made many years ago to develop this team, and they have been there for quite a while. They are the most mature. They are the ones doing more activities, because they have dedicated focus on ABM only. The other regions, I've been working with regional points of contact to exactly enable, also to discuss how we move forward with the programs. to make sure that we are going after the planning cycle in a correct way, that the selection process is done in the regions. But then the execution, that's where we have more delays, of course, because people are not 100% focused on ABM only. They have sometimes two or three different hats, and that makes their life a little bit more difficult. So the progress is not so fast as I would like it to be. Or if we had like a vertical team working exclusively on ABM, I think we would be much further down the road. But we are advancing slowly, or slower than I would like, but we are advancing, and we are every day doing more and more programs. And this year, for example, compared to last year when we did planning, we see much more solid plans coming in, with people already really thinking on how they are going to develop these activities to make sure we cover this account. And also because of the new segmentation that I was talking about, the new go-to market that we are doing, I think we gain a lot of more exposure with ABM, with the strategic account marketing program within the company. And there are more people asking, there are more people interested in that, which means that we are gaining more relevance, I think, in the business. But still, we have a lot of internal resourcing situations and difficulties that we have to overcome. And I think by the end of the year, time will tell. We are also working, for example, how to measure the ABM impact. So I'm developing like a dashboard to see how we are progressing opportunities and how much pipeline we are touching and things like that. And of course, using internal methods to do that. But that's where we are working. And this 40 people, they are spread across the globe, right, across multiple regions and countries and so on. And this 100 and something accounts is spread across this 40 people, but almost half, 45% of these accounts is sitting in North America, for example.
Yeah.
So where we
Yeah.
still have more a more solid team.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a point there, actually, you mentioned about measurement. And that's obviously, a little bit of an Achilles heel for many ABM practitioners, is how do they bring the measurement together, because it can be quite complex. Have you got any advice to share with the audience about how you're approaching measurement?
Measurement is a nightmare. It's not, it's very complicated. But of course, each company has its own, internal systems and methods and so on. But what we are trying to do this year is we are trying to associate, we have a methodology to measure the impact of a marketing activity for a period of time, a certain period of time after the activity was done. So we monitor, we do like an event today, and there are a few accounts that attend to this event, and then we monitor what happened with the pipeline like 60 days after that activity. And if there was some sort of increase in the pipeline, or or closure of any business, or anything that changed, we attribute this particular moment for that accounts that attended. So in this way, we are trying to say, okay, there was some kind of influence because this activity was done, and then there was a movement around a certain period after the day of the execution, so that we can see that there was an influence. And we also have other ways. We have like internal code CRM IDs that we call, that we are creating CRM IDs to this specific accounts this year, so that after the activities, the teams can upload to our system these codes with the contacts and so on, and there is an automatic attribution of pipeline or demand generation to this specific ID that was created for that account. So we're going to, we're trying to measure this year. We're going to see by the end of the year how the measurement progresses, and especially how we see, deals progressing from stage to stage until they get close to, as we call it, a book it and one. So deal. So that's how we're going to try to measure. I mean, for each company needs to understand what are their metric tools, internal, measurement tools, to be able to leverage that in their ABM programs. But it's a very complicated thing, I must say.
And I'm guessing you're also looking, because obviously you mentioned that these are existing customers, enterprise customers, very valuable customers to SAP. You're also looking at how the impact of your program is on the relationships and the reputation within those organizations. I'm guessing, right?
We have a proposal to do that, but it's so because I don't have this dedicated 100% dedicated people, and we have pulled in so many different conversations and situations. It's very difficult to actually make it tangible this measurement. So initially it's a kind of, okay, today I know that in this account I have a relationship with 5 people, and tomorrow I have a relationship with 10 people, but really measuring that in a systematic way, that's the challenge, because it gets very manual if you go that direction. And I mean, reputation is also, you need to use researching tools, you need to use other methodologies to use that. So we're not really there yet. We're more concerned about the business impact, and understanding that if there is business impact, that's because probably there is a better relationship and a better
Yeah.
connection with the account, right?
Correct. Well, let's just talk about something that I know is a little bit of a thing for you in terms of I see your activity on LinkedIn and some of the comments you make, and we've also talked about this before. But I think you've got a certain way of seeing ABM and account-based marketing. And I think when we were talking before, you kind of have a definition that what you think ABM is and what you think ABM isn't. Could you perhaps, Marcelo, share that with us today? Where do you see it?
Yeah, it's funny that I had to go through some internal conversations by the end of last year about that, because all of a sudden people started to talk about one too few and one too many ABM programs, and I was like freaking out, because I really think and I really believe that ABM, as the name says, is account based. ABM shouldn't be segment based, audience based, targeting account target list based or anything like that, because I think when you really work with a large group of accounts and you don't know exactly what specifically you have in this within this group, I mean, who is who in this group and what are the situations of each account, it becomes a segmentation play, right? It becomes, I'm doing this industry campaign, I'm doing this CMO, CFO, CHRO campaign, I'm doing specific to a specific group, but that's a very wide specific message, right? I think the beauty of ABM is that when you double click on this account and you select one, and then imagine that you created like a paper where you're discussing the evolution of marketing, and you have like few points in this paper and you're sending to this all groups, the entire group of CMOs. There may be a few of them that are not really concerned about the 5 points that you created, but they're just concerned about one, or they are trying to they're really struggling with implementing the basic one. They're not even in that moment in time. So I think the beauty with ABM is really when you start to dig down and understand that particular situation of that account and propose a personalization in content and in experiences that is really talking directly to them. You might be leveraging other, of course, resources from the company, papers, materials, assets that are available within the company, but you need to kind of tailor them to this specific situation of this account. And that's where I think the beauty of ABM comes in. So one of the reasons why we changed from ABM to strategic account marketing this year is that because we started to see this movement of people talking about one too few and one too many ABM, and we said, oh my God, that's going to be very confusing. So let's kind of run out of that conversation and create this strategic account marketing program. And it kind of worked well. I think we were able to position that in a nice way, and run out of the confusion with the if it's ABM one too few, one too many, and so on. Now, actually, the ABM conversation even faded away a little bit, after we did that.
Yeah, I mean, that's good advice. I think my advice to anyone who's looking to launch an ABM program is always to define what ABM means for you and for your organization. And if you decide to call it something else because that's what you read, I think that's perfectly fine. But I think the most important thing is what you guys have gone through, which is a kind of definition of what it means for you, what you want it to be for SAP. and that everyone's on board with that thinking. I think that's great to see, really, because not every company does that kind of really important building block at the beginning. Just talking about that, actually, maybe this might lead in nicely. You mentioned before that you shared an anecdote about this campaign that you ran. I think you ran it into about 60,000 employees of one customer. Is that something you could share a little bit about what was the thinking behind it, and what was the impact of running a campaign into 60,000 employees, which is a little bit different to people thinking, oh, well, they're not targeting the decision makers, they're targeting the much wider organization. What was your thinking behind that?
Yeah, we, last this was I think was end of 2022 or beginning of 23, and we decided. Actually, there was a customer. I cannot bring the customer, mention the customer name, but there was a large, really global company, very well known brand, that the CIO was really willing to get our help on promoting a certain solution that it was under discussion with the company, and so they wanted us to impact people within that organization. So what the team did is that developed a digital campaign for this company. They created like a landing page with the assets and stories around that specific solution that he was asking support, and then they did a paid social campaign in LinkedIn to tackle to this 60,000 employees of this company. And even though it's a large number, of course, we had, for example, in this company 153,000 impressions that were done to these people. Of course, not all of them click on this. Not all of them. If you think about the technology infrastructure of a company and how many people actually understand the technology infrastructure that they are working on every day, it's not a lot of people, right? But I think the exposure of the brand, the exposure of people being impacted by a campaign like this was a great thing. But we had some, for example, 2.43% engagement rate, where the industry benchmark is about 0.9%, which shows that there was some good relevance to this, particular company. So the engagement was, was very high. We had more than 700, unique visitors to this landing page, which was great. And of course, that as I say, it looks like you're making a campaign for 60,000 people, and then you only get 729 clicks, right? But of course, that in the digital world, that's kind of the numbers that we typically work on, right? It's not that you do something for thousands of people and then you get thousands of clicks as well, right? So the fact that you are getting the 700 clicks means, from an engagement perspective, a much higher number than the average benchmark is. So that was a very successful solution, and that was like a more brand building, really reputation kind of connection with the company. And imagine telling the CIO of this company, yeah, we are investing in a digital campaign and making sure that your employees will know about this specific solution. That's what he was actually looking for. So that was a great situation, and I'm a big fan of using digital to achieve this big numbers of employees in these companies. I think when we think about ABM, you don't need to think only about the decision makers. Typically we think about the CEO and the C level, the decision makers, the guys, as we call it, with the heavy pen, right? And I think what I'm telling to the SAMers in SAP is, don't think only about the decision makers. Let's think about the account. So you have multiple levels in the account. So you may do an exclusive VIP meeting with the C level, but you can also do a digital campaign for multiple people in this company, or you can do a white gloving experience for people from this company that's attending one of our large events. So let's try to touch multiple levels of this company so that you really influence the account as a whole, because we know that, of course, the guy that signs the deal is not necessarily a guy that's making all the evaluations, the technical evaluations and the usage evaluations of a certain solution. So it's important to have the relationship and influence, in multiple levels.
No, it's a very good point, and I think it also goes back to your point around adoption as well. And there's a good argument to say that running these types of campaigns into an organization is a great way to increase adoption of the solution as well, right? So let's sorry, Marcel, let's finish off with some rapid fire questions, and then I hit you with 1, 2, 3, 4 rapid fire questions. Okay, just to finish off with. So you've been in the ABM game for a long time now. You're a seasoned. I could probably call you a seasoned ABM app,
More or less.
or in your case, or an SAM app. In your case, SAP. What would you say is the greatest learning you've had about ABM over the course of the last years?
I think that maybe the relationship between volume and value. It's something that's very important. As I was describing before, that's why I believe so much in the account base because usually we are used to work with this large campaigns and large numbers, and you had multiple customers attending something, you have thousands of clicks and things like that. But you need to really double click to this specific account. And I have an interesting CMO story. Back in the day, I was talking to a CMO customer, and we were, I don't remember what we were selling. Maybe I think maybe it was like mobility or something like that, apps, something like that. And the guy was saying, I cannot even implement, something that's very basic in my organization. How can I, really think about this whole technology evolution that's coming, later? So really understanding the scenario of the customer and how you're adding value to that particular customer, I think that's a very good learning from ABM. And that's something that I learned, many years ago when I used to, I was working in telco companies, and I used to visit, this customers with this big operators with the sales team, and they would go to the, procurement or technology departments, and I would go to the marketing department to make, relationship with them and help them to sell the services that we were actually selling the operator, right? And then you really realize that each organization has a completely different way to approach things and a maturity level. So that's the beauty of ABM. I think that's the nicest you know learning that I can take out of ABM in this last 2 years, I guess.
No, so I think it's a great one to share. So following on from that, Marcelo, the hardest part of ABM for those listeners out there who perhaps are new to ABM, what would you say is the hardest thing about ABM?
It's, I think, what defines what personalization really means. I think there are different levels of personalization that you can do. People can do a one-to-many campaigns. I know that today you have many digital tools and websites that can do massive customization, right? That you can access the website and can say, hello, Mr. I don't know, hello, Mr. Coca-Cola, how are you? And based on your domains and things like that. But that's not exactly the personalization that we want to achieve with ABM, right? I think when you're really able to work with creative, with an agency to really come up with something that's really dedicated to that particular account, that's where the ABM play really is strong, and and uh, and that's where we are able to build a big difference, I think, to that particular account.
That's music to my ears because I think that's like what we do at our agency is very much around that area of deep personalization and not so much playing on the technology, but much more playing on what you know about the individual or the account. Um, I think we may have touched on this before, but I'll ask the question again. The greatest misconception about ABM.
Oh, I think it's doing one too few and one too many ABM. I think I like to repeat that a lot. I know that there are people calling ABM one too many, one too few, but I really don't agree with this concept. I think if you go back to the core ABM idea, it's really account based, right? The name says. So you really need to be able to understand this particular account and develop something that's related to their reality, to their needs. That's where the ABM play comes in. And when you go to one too few or one too many, it means that you're already segmenting or you're already, defining a common, attribute that you want to touch for this group of accounts. And even though you might say that there's some level of personalization there, I wouldn't call it really ABM, right? It may be just a segmented campaign, or targeted campaign, I think it makes more sense to call it like that than ABM.
Well, there'll be a lot of listeners out there thinking, am I doing ABM or am I not doing ABM? So I think it's a very valid point there to think around the level of personalization, the level of actually getting under the skin of the customer or the prospect. And obviously, if you think about the origins of ABM, obviously the origins of ABM 21 years ago were with customers as opposed to new logo acquisition. And I think there's been this big shift, I suppose, I think you probably agree, with ABM, people looking at ABM as being a solution for new logo acquisition, which it can be, and it is one of the use cases. But the heritage of ABM, the history of ABM is definitely with what you're doing there at SAP in terms of customer expansion, customer loyalty, customer adoption. Very last question for you. We're recording this on a Monday, Marcelo, and it's obviously you're in Brazil, so it's early morning for you. But let's imagine we're going to fast forward to Friday, and it's you've had a very tough week, and you're just looking forward to shutting your laptop down, and you're going to have a cold beer or a cold Coca-Cola or whatever your favorite tipple is. And you get a call from an old friend of yours from one of your old companies. And they say, hey, Marcelo, you won't guess this, but I've been asked to launch an ABM strategy and I'm going to present to the CEO next week. So they ask you, what is that one thing you've got to make sure that I include in that presentation? So what would be that one thing you say, make sure you include this in the presentation?
Well, I think, in ABM, less is more. So really have a data-driven, decisions. If he's going to present this, he needs to go through the numbers of, his company and say, okay, these are my top value customers because of whatever criteria they have, right? And say, this is the ones I believe we should focus on. And instead of trying to embrace the world, we should focus on this small group of customers here because they have high revenue expectations or high renewal expectations, in the future, or because of some business reason they are strategic, and then they should be the ones to focus on. I think when someone goes after that kind of data-driven decision and don't think about, let's try to establish a huge ABM program, let's focus on this few accounts first, which are the most valuable to the company, I think there's a higher chance of success.
So keep it small, be led by data,
yep.
and then see what happens, and then you can grow from there. And hopefully you'll get the CEO to give you the green light, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, Marcelo, well, thank you so much for sharing your ABM journey with us today, and wish you and everyone there at SAP all the success for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Thank you all.